The beginning of a new D&D campaign is one of the most exciting times for both DMs and players. Players have their new characters with new exciting abilities and backstories. The DM has a new campaign idea. Maybe it's a module they've been dying to run for years, or a brand new world they've been working on forever. And then somewhere along the way, that momentum just withers away. Your party's excitement deflates and a familiar enemy rears its ugly head once more. Schedules. But this is a mask. A crafty disguise where tabletop gaming's true big bad evil guy hides behind it. His true name, Disinterest. You're left at the table thinking, they were all so excited, and now they're all so busy. If you've experienced this, you're not alone, but that doesn't mean it has to keep happening. My name is Sam, I'm a dungeon master and former teacher, and I've spent the last decade teaching over 100 new players how to tell their stories using my favorite game in the world, Dungeons & Dragons. In this video, we're gonna find out what's really killing your campaign's momentum, why your players' own brains are literally working against the campaign, and the 2 methods I use in my own table that have kept 9 players engaged and showing up for over a year. This is Tabletop University. I have to get this part out of the way. To dungeon masters and game masters out there, it's not all on you. The DM does have many jobs and responsibilities, but the player's job is this. They have to choose to care. A DM can build a fantastic world that captures a familiar genre of fun things to do and interact with, but if players show up as passengers in the story, ready to be entertained instead of choosing to be engaged, those sessions are going to eventually run out of steam. Emily Axford describes the responsibilities that a player has in her episode of Adventuring Academy.
I have played at tables with PCs that were not into it, weren't forming attachments to the world, weren't like making decisions about how their characters felt about things. And let me tell you, for all my bag of tricks, those sessions were bad. They weren't fun.
I think that's the thing, is like the idea that it's the DM's job to engage you. It's not that that's wrong. It's the DM's job to give you an opportunity to like be your coolest self, but it is not the DM's job to tell you what you care about. It's not the DM's job to tell you what you want to do, what you're here for. Those are all decisions that you need to make yourself, you know, and the story is going to be way better if you come in being like, this is what I care about. I have a strong opinion about you. I have a strong opinion about you.
Emily's a professional, so for her, this is second nature, but that doesn't mean it's easy. You can't just tell someone to care more.
I care now. You make me care more.
Even for players who want to, their brains are working against them. When you start a new campaign, that dopamine hit of newness is real, but also temporary. After a few weeks and a few sessions, the shine wears off. Without a real reason to care about the world and a real reason to keep caring when there might be multiple weeks between those sessions, disinterest walks right back in. That leads us to the 2 places where disinterest gets its foothold. Fortunately, if your players have chosen to care, I've found fixes for both, and the science backs them up. Players show up to a new campaign with a name, a class, and sometimes a backstory. They teleport into a tavern, waiting to be told where to go, like my first Skyrim playthrough looking for a quest marker. My first campaign was riddled with this. I was running Lost Mine of Phandelver, the party's pumped at first, but as the sessions went on, I start hearing things like, wait, who's Gundren? Why does it matter if the Black Spider gets the mines? Honestly, these are valid questions. If the Black Spider does gain control of the mine, the people of Phandelver will probably be fine, I guess. I don't know, the module's a little messy at that point. We just met them, we're not that attached. Point being, we lost momentum because their characters had no real ties to the world and no example for how to form those. The answer to this is weirdly found in the psychology behind a Swedish furniture store. In 2011, researchers published a study called the IKEA effect. The finding was simple, but kind of incredible. People will pay 63% more for furniture they built themselves than for an identical item that's pre-assembled. 63%. And they're doing more of the work. It's counterintuitive, but leads us to an obvious conclusion. People value what they help create.
In other words, if you've made it yourself from your own ingredients, you just think it's better than anything else that you could buy in a shop or anything else.
Is that why people are really smug about their babies?
Yes, basically.
In D&D terms, the DM built the world and the story. Of course they're invested. Players show up to something someone else made, so we shouldn't be that surprised when their brain tells them it's less valuable and leaves them unmotivated to interact with it. Self-determination theory identifies 3 basic human needs that drive motivation: autonomy, feeling like your choices are your own; relatedness, feeling connected to the people and the world around you; and competence, feeling that your actions actually matter and produce results. And thanks to the IKEA effect, we're gonna get all 3. During character creation, I asked every player to create 2 NPCs that their new character knows. A CNPC, or character non-player character. One note, I'd pitch them the world first so that their CNPCs actually make sense in it. Then the only real stipulation is they have to like one and dislike the other.
I have a strong opinion about you. I have a strong opinion about you.
Don't overcomplicate it. Bullet points in a text message are totally fine. Just a name, a relationship, and a reason for the feeling. John, the local blacksmith, is always rude to me. I hate that guy. My best friend is a barkeep named Matilda. That's it. They're just touchstones for you to be like, hey, I know a guy. If that's all they ever do, if Matilda just works at the tavern for 20 sessions and goes home, they've done their job. But she also might be running an underground poker game in the basement. Up to the DM. One tip is that if you choose someone popular like the king, half the table probably has an opinion on him already, so it can stop feeling special. The more specific, the better. As a DM, just make sure your players know going in that not every NPC or CNPC has to make an appearance. It seems simple, but the reality is that suddenly your players have skin in the game. As Matilda, or anyone with a gambling problem knows, this matters. The best part for the DM is that you're getting their character's perception of these NPCs, which means it's incomplete. That gap between what your players thinks that they know about this NPC and what is actually true is a tool you can use again and again. I give each CNPC 2 things: a goal, something simple as I want to retire after 40 years as a blacksmith, and a secret, something that can be discovered or revealed. One of my players in an old campaign created a scrappy tiefling street kid for his Kinku detective character. My role is set in a fantasy version of 1950s organized crime America. I've been watching a lot of Fargo. He'd taken this kid under his wing, and that kid later reveals he's built an entire network of homeless children across the city gathering information. Yeah, I stole that from Game of Thrones. Because he idolized this detective so much, he basically decided, if he's a detective, I want to be one too, the only way he knew how. When my player figured this out, his face lit up in a way that I'll remember for a very long time. His character had a real impact on the world on an NPC he came up with. This is basic DM advice, but the world should change because your players are in it. Unfortunately, defeating disinterest at the table is only half the battle. Between sessions, disinterest retreats to its lair, where he is much stronger. Work, family, prior obligations, social media, every distraction competes for the attention of both you and your players in the days and weeks between your sessions. This is where momentum goes to die, and where disinterest thrives. The session ends and the players leave the table on a high. Maybe there's a big fight, a dramatic reveal, a cool moment, everyone's talking over each other on the way out, someone's already theorizing about what happens next, they can't wait for the next session. And then life goes on. Work, family, school, the 1,000 small obligations that fill the space between your sessions. Each day, the momentum and the memory of that peak session slows down, feeling more distant. 2, maybe 3 weeks later, your players sit back down at the table and you're prepared to launch back into the previous session, and the first thing out of their mouth is, wait, remind me what we were doing again? This isn't laziness or a lack of caring. This is biology. In the 1880s, a German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus spent years studying his own memory, testing himself on information and recording exactly how fast it faded. What he discovered became one of the most important findings in the history of cognitive psychology: the forgetting curve. Within 1 hour of learning something new, roughly 50% of it is already gone. Within 24 hours, that number climbs to 70%. Within a week, over 90% of that information is just gone. 90%, 7 days. No matter how memorable a session may be, when your players aren't actively thinking about it, their brains just dump it. Not because they don't care, but because their brains need the space to make room for things that are actively happening around them. Out of sight, out of mind isn't just a saying, it's science. Fortunately, Ebbinghaus also discovered the antidote. Spaced repetition is the practice of re-engaging with information before it fully fades. Every time you revisit something, the memory strengthens and the forgetting slows. You don't need to review everything constantly, you just need to create touch points, moments that remind the brain, this still exists. This still matters. Oops. If your campaign only ever exists at the table, it's competing with everything else in your players' lives for a few hours or so every couple weeks. It's not a fair fight. Disinterest doesn't need to convince your players they don't care. It just needs them to forget how much they do. So let's do the smart thing here and use the antidote. One of the best ways I've found to keep that momentum alive between sessions is with character journal entries written by a single player from their character's point of view about the events of the last session. After each session, I ask for a volunteer or someone specific if they had a particularly big moment. Almost always they say yes, and almost always there are multiple volunteers, because it's genuinely fun. I try to get the journals out at the halfway point between sessions, if it's a 2-week session, 1 week away, right in the window where Ebbinghaus tells us that the forgetting curve is doing the most damage. The journals serve as spaced repetition exactly when our brains need reinforcement the most. Here's the process. They write their entry first and send it directly to me, not to the group, which is really important. You want to get their first draft before anything else because it's awesome to get their unfiltered perception of the session. What did they think was the most important? That's what they'll write about. What did they notice? That's what they'll write about. Also, what did they miss? This is extremely helpful when prepping for your next session. Brennan Lee Mulligan talks about the value of reading his own players' journals in the same episode I showed earlier. It's worth watching the whole thing if you haven't, it's fantastic. Once I have their first draft, I send them my recap notes. They're bullet points that I write for myself, just to remember what happens each session. They use these to fill in gaps and add things in that they may have forgotten. Then it goes out to the group, where everyone gets a reminder that these characters and their stories still exist. It restores our momentum and usually gets people talking about scheduling the next session. The journals themselves become some of the most memorable pieces from the entire campaign. In our current one, there's a character who comes from a people who don't read or write. They use drawings to communicate. So her journal entries aren't written at all. They're sketches as her character would draw them. We get a visual record of the session from the perspective of that character. It's honestly one of the most charming and creative things that has come out of this campaign. I love it. It's awesome. That's the journal working exactly as intended. Maybe it's an exception, but it's a creative expression that happens to solve a psychological problem. It's not homework. It reminds us that these things happened and that our brains need to make space for them, even when we're not around the table. Defeating disinterest once isn't enough. As your campaign grows, you have to keep swinging because, like any good bad guy in fantasy, they'll keep coming back. Use your CNPCs. Nothing gets a party moving faster than a threat to someone they actually care about, especially if they came up with one themselves. The CNPC bank isn't a one-time exercise. As your campaign moves into new areas, times, and story arcs, go back to this. Ask for new CNPCs to replace those who didn't make it, or whose stories may have closed. How have old ones changed because of what the party did? A CNPC that felt really small in session 2 may be your main villain by session 20. You see, I've been battling disinterest for a long time. Back in my science classroom, he was my enemy there as well. I learned early on that if I couldn't tether my lesson to something my students already cared about, something from their own lives, from their own world, I'd lost them before the tardy bell rang. We even used those weekly journals so that spaced repetition could keep our brains from dumping information that they need later. Give your players a reason to care. Then give them a reason to keep caring. It's worked for my tables, it can work for yours. With disinterest defeated and our momentum finally restored, our busy lives and impossible schedules somehow still seem to find a way to line up. All 10 of us. We get to keep hanging out and telling cool stories about characters and worlds that we all care about. And at the end of the day, story is all that matters. This has been Tabletop University. I've been Sam. Thank you for watching.